Hey
recording,
everyone.
so go ahead.
Cool. Well, hey everyone. Welcome back. It is Sunshine, the pink-haired sober witch, and you are joining us on for the Sober Witch Life podcast. And I'm super excited today because I decided probably, I don't know, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago to open the show up and bring some guests on. And so today we officially have the very first guest. His name is Justin, and I've got some notes here. I love his little bio too, but he's a mystical comedian, a spiritual Sherpa, an author, and what he calls a sorcerer. After walking through addiction, PTSD, depression, and anxiety, Justin had a powerful, life changing experience that completely shifted his path. And now he's here to help people reconnect to their self worth and step into their highest potential. And I love this so much. Think a little Deepak and a little Tupac and a whole lot of truth with some comedic edge, right? He's also an author, and we'll have him share about that later. But Justin, I'm so excited and really delighted. We've had a couple of conversations over the course of the last year, and now everybody on the podcast gets to hear. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here and there and everywhere. It's the magic of the internet.
I know it is the magic of the internet. So, um, you know, we'll let the conversation flow where it needs to go. If there's anything else that comes up, I'll just kind of ask spirit to guide us and to lead us to what's the most beneficial topic and conversation that we can. But I would love to start off. I've got here, when you look back, right? Because we are talking about recovery, and you look back, how would you describe your addiction? And not just like what happened, but really like who it made you, right? Who were you? Who was the Justin that was actively struggling with addiction at one time?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's a good place to start, certainly. Yeah, I was, who I was at that time was the character that my life had created, and that is who I was. And so I accepted that, and because I accepted that I was this character that my unfortunate childhood and upbringing had created, then I just continued to be that character. And it wasn't until my awakening time that I realized that I was not that character. I was the awareness of that character, which meant that I was in complete control of myself at all times. I just wasn't aware of that. I didn't understand the fact that if we are not constantly questioning our thoughts and our feelings before they become actions, we've been relegated to organic robots. And society is filled with these. It's the fun Gen Z term of the RPC, the role playing character, and it's these characters we run into that are not questioning their thoughts and feelings, and they're just running a program. And I don't know what the actual number is, but I can tell you the majority of society is this way. Is that 51%? Is that 90%? I don't know, but I'm thinking it's higher. It's certainly,
Yeah.
I don't think
I
it's
mean, I,
51%. I'm thinking it's 80, 90% from the people I run into. Like, it's high.
yeah. Where do you
So,
think that came
yeah.
from? Where do you think that came from? Like, because you've shared, I'm blessed where I've heard your story, a handful of times we've talked. But I think some of our listeners, like, you talk about this kind of how you were programmed, like, the mask you were taught to like put on, so to speak, to be this RPC. Where do you think, in your childhood? I know there's specifically, you talked about this love of TV, if I remember correctly, as a child. So like, how did that start? Like, where do you think that really came from, right? To
Yeah.
create that character.
And it's fascinating to look at back, and I love talking about it because it's no longer I've disconnected. Once you can truly be a master of your own universe once you disconnect the emotional charge from a memory. Because everything is about being now, here and now. We are only now. We are only who we are now and who we're creating to be. And so if you can go back in your past and have a memory without the emotional charge, you've now turned trauma into wisdom. It's alchemy. It's alchemy. You've turned your trauma into wisdom. So I can look back and easily talk about all, the horrible things that were tough and I've been through without having it, affect me in any sort of emotional way, which is fascinating. And it's part of the reason why I'm here and trying to get around that, we become our trauma. If you're not aware of it and then, you're not questioning things and your actions, then you've You've become, something, you could have an amazing childhood and everything could happen greatly. And then something happens, a husband dies, a wife dies tragically, and all of a sudden everything switches. And so you don't have to have the bad childhood or anything like that for trauma to just hit you out of nowhere. And if you don't start the healing process being aware of what's happening, you become that trauma and it affects everything. So that's that, being aware of what happened in childhood. And it wasn't anything. So my childhood wasn't these knee jerk. There's trauma with a capital T, right? And there's trauma with a lowercase t. And I was trauma with a lowercase t. It's this slow burn kind of trauma. My mother, she was going through a divorce at the time. There was no one else in the house. It was just me and her. So, she was in her own pain. She had her own, besides the divorce, she had her own horrible, childhood. Now I understand. But this caused her to not be she went internal. She never externalized her. She wasn't an angry person. She was a kind person. But she would just go into a room and just kind of shut her door, and that would be it. And so I was on my own a lot. And that's what I found to take away my pain. That was my first drug, was the TV and comedy and food. And, these were things I found in childhood that took me out of my pain. That was like, these were things that were like, oh, okay, these are my first addictions, was the TV, video game, food. These were the accessible things in my world that would take me out of my pain. So that's what I became addicted to first. And so that's really what got me funny, I would say, because I was kind of a loner and I didn't really understand people. It's like the more people I met, the more I liked my dog, like it was just one of those things. It's like, I didn't quite understand. And because of my upbringing, I was very isolated. Like I didn't quite know how to connect with people. And so but I found comedy, and that's where like I found connecting with people. And that's where I found something. It was like, oh, he thinks I'm funny. Like, oh, we have a connection now. Oh, he's seen the same things I've seen. Well, like, did you see the Simpsons last night? The Simpsons in the 90s were comedic gold. Like anyone that was kind of funny was watching the Simpsons. So it was like, that was the one thing that was, you see the Simpsons last night. And so I started connecting with people. I started realizing I could connect with people through pop culture and through humor. And so that's really where things came in. But, it's that spiritual bankruptcy, and that's where it came from, and that childhood spiritual bankruptcy.
Did you ever, I'm curious because this question's popping into my mind.
Yeah.
Were there ever times like as a child when you think about the TV or the video games or the food do you ever have any memory of thinking like something's off here, like something isn't right, like any like recollection of this, like the glitch in the matrix happening as a kid, so to speak, like, oh, wow, there's something weird here. Do you have any recollection of that?
You have great questions. So no. So at the time, you're running your program at the time and you found something, and this is a good segue into kind of something that really has changed me, is this difference between joy and happiness, right? That they're very different things. And so what I found in childhood and adulthood with drugs and alcohol, but what I found in childhood was something that brought me happiness. And so it brought me out of that spiritual bankruptcy. So anyone who's got addiction problems or anything really, I mean, these are all symptoms of the same thing: anxiety, depression, OCD. There's just a litany of things. Addiction, and they like to like place addiction in different categories. Like, oh, your addiction to this, your addiction to that. That's a different thing. You go to gambling. Okay, go here. Pills. You go here. Drinking. You don't mix. Your meetings, and you don't talk about your drugs and drinking. Everything's separate, but it's all the same thing, which is ridiculous that we're treating things so separately. Mm-hmm. And so once that's the difference between once someone in spiritual bankruptcy has no joy. So when someone in spiritual bankruptcy has no joy, they find something that makes them happy. Well, now, their joy cup is brought to extreme full. And they're like, I can't believe I can feel like that. How do I feel like that more often? So that's the happiness chasing. So that's what I was doing as a childhood. That was happiness chasing, and it was whatever was making it. Was so my cherry Coke and my Cheetos when I got home from school. That was a happiness thought. That was like, okay, I just got to make it through today because I can have my cherry Coke, I can have my Cheerios, and I can watch whatever funny program I decided to watch that day. And that was my exit from society. That was my happiness because I had no joy. And so what happens then, what I've noticed in healing is that, and this could be seen as a good or a bad thing, is that when you fill your joy cup more, your the things that made you happy, right? They still so like let's say okay, so your joy cup. I'm gonna get this on camera. So the joy cup is low, and then you fill your joy cup. Well, now the things that make you happy still make you that happy, but because your joy cup is fuller, it doesn't feel as happy. So like the things that used to make you ecstatic, when you start healing, they bring less happiness, which makes you less excited to do them all the time, which is a good thing. And that's where I've come in with like the being able to get in better control.
Yeah, there's this interesting thought that pops into my head around like when you talk about the happiness, and I agree. And we've had some conversations like in the coven recently about joy and the difference between joy and what we thought was happiness, right? Like what we thought, and it's like, you know, on a scale of emotions, we were in the shame or the guilt or the depression or the sadness or the sorrow or the boredom. And so anything that removes those feels happy, regardless of whether or not it's happy, right? It's the opposite of those. And we, for some reason, just labeled it as happy, right? Yeah. So I would agree. That's interesting, because I do have some glimpses as a child of where I knew some of the things that I was doing weren't just rebellious nature. They were harming me, but I just did not care. I did not give a fuck, so to speak. That's why I asked the question. You know, you're you describe like as a childhood and seeing and recognizing, these now I'm assuming these things as addictions. Where did they switch, right? Cheetos and TV and video games aren't necessarily going to destroy someone's life in the way of like substance, takes us down those dark paths. Where did they switch? Where did you let go of these things that were bringing childhood happiness and switched into, the stuff us adults tend to find easier to get our hands on than a child would, I suppose.
High school. That's it. Yeah, and I was and it wasn't even early in high school. Mine was more like kind of more senior year is when I really started kind of coming out of my shell and really becoming, something else. This kind of debaucherous party person that was this shy kind of loner that like all of a sudden like transformed into something very different. And that was high school. And and I knew kind of at that point, childhood, you don't think anything's wrong, but like when you start really getting into a lot of trouble, and not just trouble at school, but legal trouble. Certainly, I've thankfully avoided any felonies in my life, but I've had a lot of misdemeanors. It's been I've had a lot of one night jails. So that to kind of wake me up, and those are never fun. And those are obvious signs that you're not on the right path. If you're spending nights in jail, it's time to look at things. And so certainly, when you say like, do you know something's wrong in childhood? No, in childhood I knew nothing was wrong because it was like what made me happy is what made me happy, and I'm going to stick to that. Whereas in adulthood, what made me happy was now a problem. It wasn't a problem in childhood. It kind of was because I was a chubby kid, and I could have been in better shape. I found sports later in life, and I did like sports, and I did do stuff, but it wasn't enough to overcome the kind of food and laziness addiction. So, at that point you don't, but then you do. And so, yeah, at that point it's time to kind of find something different, but it's happiness chasing. They say money can't buy happiness. That's bullshit. It can buy all the happiness you want, but what it can't buy is joy. And joy was the one thing that I realize now that is truly lacking in my life and in many people's lives is they're just constantly chasing happiness and saying, and it is happy, you do feel good, but it's if you can't feel joy in between the times of happiness, there's something, your soul is essentially calling for healing.
Yeah, I mean,
If that's what it is.
in the mental health like world, they'd consider us chasing dopamine, right? If you're chasing happiness, you're chasing these
Yep.
dopamine hits, right? The literal kind of happiness chemical. Um, you know, it's there's this thought that comes to mind when you say jail, and I think about, and I would love your opinion on this, because there are a lot of people that believe it takes jail or a DUI or something of this nature to be what kind of wakes them up. But like, what's your perspective on what could be jail, right? What could be jail without being in a locked box, so to speak? I'd love
Yeah.
to know.
I mean, there are emotional. So, they say, you know, the hole. You only stop digging your hole when you put the shovel down. So for some people, that hole is really deep, and it has to go really, and things have to get really bad. Now, for me, thankfully, they didn't have to get too bad on that end, but I was at an emotional jail that was like, I couldn't have been any miserable. I mean, you could have said you're off to federal prison, and I would have been like, fine. It can't be any better than what I'm experiencing right now. So, like it can be very, very, very difficult. So, what was the kind of original
No,
question?
no, I love the question. Like, what else could be jail? You just described
Oh,
emotional
yeah.
jail. Like, right? Not everybody needs to to be locked up in a cell. Not everybody needs to wrap their car around a tree, right? So how are these other people? Where's their jail, right? And I love that description of like some people just have to learn to put the shovel down, and for some it's a shallow hole, and others it's deep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's when, yeah,
Yeah.
and that the worst is probably even than jail and stuff is seeing the disappointment in loved ones' eyes. So that's, your child, with tears in their eyes, that, if it's your sibling, like it's, or your partner, begging you to, and it can be tough for people in my position that have kind of spent most of their life single on purpose, trying to avoid any sort of emotion. That can be tough because you don't have you've created a life where you don't have people necessarily like, like hoping you get through, and supporting you. I do have family that, but nothing immediate. So it's always been up to me, and it is absolutely up to you. So, those holes we create for ourselves, they're emotional, and they can be worse than jail. It can be much worse. You create yourself in an emotional jail, it's just as bad. And so it's about being able to recognize that and come out of it, because awareness is the defense system against those things. Awareness, being aware of what's going on, like why you're feeling the way you are, the ways to get you out of those feelings, and sometimes you just need to sit and feel and be okay with it, because emotions are not going to kill us. So there's many different things we can do at the time, but awareness is like one of those things. It's like, I'm feeling this. Do I need to just sit here and meditate and feel it? Is it something, like, am I just feeling angry? Can I go hit a, punching bag and get it? Everything's different. That there's very different. Is this something that I can, is this something I'm feeling bad for because I treated someone bad, and so now I need to send an apology their way? So there's so many, and your intuition will tell you what will heal what you're feeling in the moment. But stillness is kind of the key to the vault of blissfulness, stillness. So that's where it comes in.
I love that stillness is the key. And I'm thinking back to kind of you talking about the RPC, the player character, so to speak. And what that player character never does is pause to contemplate, to think, to be curious of whether or not this is as good as it gets, so to speak, right? Was there a moment, like a lot of people say, where you knew you had to put the shovel down, or you hit a rock bottom and you couldn't go any further? Is there a moment? And if so, like, do you remember what it felt like in your body, right? Not just like what the thought was. Do you remember what it felt like in your body, that time that you knew you could no longer continue to live in the way that you were, that you wanted to take that, to stop being that RPC?
Yeah, that was it's just one of those moments that you kind of it's the shovel down moment. It's just like, okay, I'd like to put the shovel down now for at least for a while. And it takes what it takes, and it's impossible to know what it's going to take for person to person because it's so subjective. And the thing is I get asked, like, why is this person not wanting them to help me, and like this and this. It's you have to take a hands off approach and let them dig their hole. And that's what happened with me. It's like you just have to let people get to the point where it's like, I am done. And hopefully that point is not death, but you never want to give up on someone. But if that's the thing with me, is just and that's kind of the approach my family took for a little bit, was trying to understand what was going on, and that there was a point at which it was just hands off, and they just let me. And those were the nights I spent nights on the street because I was unwilling to get help, and had absolutely nothing. So I was more willing to spend a night on a park bench or some shady place, and be high, rather than try and go get help with sober. And that's extreme, but that's something that you have to do and you have to go through. And for anyone with people that are in that situation, it's very tough because you're constantly wanting to help them and get out there, and but if they don't want help, that's when you have to absolutely let go, and just wait for them to want to help. And because at that point then they're open to things, and because if they don't want help, they're not actually hearing what you're saying. They're not actually hearing or accepting anything that you're doing. They don't want help. They're not going to listen to rehab, or they'll take your $40 and go spend it on drugs and say, yeah, okay, whatever. And then so they're not interested. So just let it go. And that's very hard for someone who truly loves someone, a child, a parent, sibling who's really struggling with stuff, to just like let them be and let them make their own mistakes. It's difficult, but it's necessary. And that's what happened with me. And I eventually made enough mistakes to get it. But that's just what had to happen. And I had to make a bunch of mistakes. And thankfully, it was nothing too dramatic, drastic that would affect the rest of my life. I didn't kill someone in a car accident and be in prison forever and now have a felony on my record. I was very, very blessed and grateful that nothing dramatic happened. But I've been arrested many times, and they're all misdemeanors, but I've had several arrests where I've spent nights in jail, and I know what it's like. So, I don't know, prison, long-term prison is like, but I sure know what I've spent many nights in jail, probably under 10, but I'm probably 7 or something. So, and that's just what had to happen. And so my hole wasn't super deep, but it was deeper than some. Some don't need to go to jail or spend nights homeless, or, some people don't need to do that. So it's a hands-off approach. And that's what I like to tell people that are kind of talking to right now, that are either struggling or dealing with someone struggling, is hands off. It's just, you have to how deep do you want your hole to be? Put the shovel down.
I'm curious, and maybe we'll get into like the spiritual, but we're on this topic, and I've got to ask this question. So I agree that we are all individually responsible for the actions that we take in life, right? We are the only ones that can take a step forward, and we are the individuals that are taking the step back if that happens. From a magical perspective, though, people have often asked, I belong to a lot of Facebook groups, a lot of witchcraft groups, and people will ask, is there anything that I can do? I'm struggling from addiction. Is there anything I can do magically? They'll say, I've got a loved one that's struggling from addiction. And there's one thing that I've come back to time and time again, because I even myself do this, with folks that I love and I know are struggling, is I don't care what label you want to put on it, but my personal belief is, prayer or spell work around courage. Right? Because to take a step towards healing, to take a step towards putting the bottle or the needle or the drug or whatever it is down, you have to be able to to find a lot of courage within yourself to do. It's a scary thing to do. So I'm curious, Justin, like, do you believe from kind of like even a magical or an esoteric, is there anything that we can do if we are suffering or we could do for a loved one? We can't make someone, right? We can't force someone's hand, though interventions will try to tell you otherwise. But is there anything you believe that people can do to help themselves magically or to help someone they love?
Yeah, for sure. And you're using the correct terminology. I appreciate that. So bravery is when you approach a situation and you don't feel any fear. So brave people essentially are just doing what they're born to do. Be brave. Courage, on the other hand, is what most of us are facing. So that is feeling the fear and stepping through it. That is being courageous. Courageous is what I do. It sounds like it's what you do. I'm not a brave person. I don't not feel fear. I feel the fear and I feel it intensely because I have anxiety. But I step through it, and so that is being courageous. And for anyone out there, it is. What was the second part?
Do you think that there is anything that we can do to help, right? Either as an individual magically or, for somebody that we love, right? Is there anything that we can do? Because my personal opinion as a magical person is I don't believe my hands are tied. I believe that spell work and magic and ritual and prayers and intention, whatever you want to call it, can be beneficial. So my daily prayer includes prayers for people I know in my life that are struggling with addiction.
Absolutely, yeah. The biggest thing, is to get out of yourself. So, and it's also to know yourself. It's also to know that you're not this character, right? When you told me in the very beginning, it's like you are the awareness of the character that you've created. And once you realize you're the awareness of the character you've created, because if you think about it, the awareness of a thought is not a thought. So what is that? That's you. So to get in charge of yourself, that's the critical part is to awakening, is to understand that, and to start the healing process is to know that you're not this character, you're not this program that either society or yourself has created, and to step out of that. That's the first step to healing. Absolutely, 100%. If you're struggling with it, in the early stages, I say separate yourself from, if you're struggling from, in your environment, to find something, if you're struggling with substances, even just a detox, or if you've never been to rehab, I always suggest that to start, because you need to create the sober you. And in order to do that, you have to complete separation from your environment for a time. And so rehab is very good in that way. It takes you out of that. You create a new pathway in your brain, and then you're brought back to your environment. You can navigate things better. It's still difficult, but it's better. But to kind of create that awareness and try and get that separation, because humans cannot heal while numb. So if you're on substances or doing things that are continuing to make you numb, which can be many things. It doesn't have to just be substances. It could be gambling, shopping, sex, whatever, anything that makes us feel good, we can kind of fill that void. But we cannot heal while numb, because if you don't feel it, you won't heal it. And so whatever you resist is going to persist. So it's a matter of letting that in, and that's a very difficult time period, which is where the whole detox and being therapy, like talking to people, if you're doing this whole thing alone, it's going to be extremely difficult. So, going through these emotions, understand that this is a very normal part of healing. Like the first week or two is, if you're, especially with substances in particular, but any happiness chasing thing, and especially these days, it's the phone and food. People is like, I don't have a problem with drugs. Well, most people have there's something they use to, distract from pain and they're struggling with, for most people, not all, but the vast majority. And phone and food is the one that society is addicted to, that anyone can understand. But pulling yourself away from those things and creating healthy habits. So phone and food, there are things that we need, drugs and alcohol, we can cut those out, and just completely cut them out and live great lives. People that are addicted to phone and food, well, you have to create a healthy relationship with those things. So and you can't heal while numb. So you have to create this healthy relationship with these things that are taking us, and then cut out the things that need to be cut out. And that process, especially the first week or two, is very difficult. So you want to be plugged into something, whether it's, and if it's meetings, fine, whatever it is, like stay at therapy, meetings, rehab, whatever it is, but you need help. And so, but the first step is to recognize that you do have power, that, the whole AA thing of, the first step is to admit you're powerless. Well, this is an old archaic kind of thinking of religion, where there's a separation between you and God. You are God. So it is not about letting God in. It's about letting God out. And once you realize that you have that kind of power and you can let God out, well, now you've taken full control of your life. And so that's, yeah.
Yeah, I love this, because the way I've described it, as far as like the path of the witch, is that we were powerless and we're gaining our power. Like, you have to realize, to your point, that you actually do have this power, this connection, this, divine inspiration. It's the acting in the powerlessness, right? Pretending like you're just being that RPC. That's where the addiction is able to kind of take hold and brew itself. I'm curious, Justin, we're talking about some spiritual and esoteric topics here. Like, we're touching base on these things. What was your relationship to spirituality before you stepped into recovery versus after? Like, what was that comparison like?
Yeah, there's none. I mean, I kind of passively went to Sunday school growing up. I wasn't something that really interested me, and I kind of had jerky teachers, so it's just something that just really. So when I had to say around 11 or 12, I just stopped going, because I had no connection to it whatsoever, and it was just this, it was the kind of Christian route, and it just wasn't interest to me. And my mom never went. She she had my brother take me, and it was just like, yeah, take him. Like, she had no interest in it whatsoever. So it just, there was no connection there. And when I finally found something, that was in the second time in rehab, because the first time in rehab it was like, just get my body clean. Like, I understand I'm addicted. I understand the science aspect of addiction. My body is addicted to these horrible chemicals, and when I take these chemicals away, I experience withdrawal. And that's what I'm going through, and that's why I feel like shit. So I just have to experience this withdrawal, and then I'll be fine. And that was my plan. And so the first rehab, that's what I did. And shockingly, it lasted 3 months, which I'm surprised it even lasted that long. But it lasted 3 months, which I'm actually pretty proud of, considering I had no spiritual. It was just me, just like feeling good and feeling clean and driving on that energy, which is honestly impressive when I look back on it. Because the spiritual aspect, they say that, in recovery, the spiritual aspect of recovery is like the wet part of the ocean, right? Like, it's everything. So, like it's, and so now I realize that it's wise to see myself as a shark swimming in that spiritual ocean, right? Because the shark knows, stagnation is the killer. So I try to see myself as a shark swimming that spiritual ocean, and it never be satisfied. But I didn't know that back then. And so it was the second time when I realized there was a spiritual aspect. And so the second time was like, okay, I'm open to these things that you're talking about, because apparently the ego, right? The ego says, well, I know everything and I'm good, and you people don't know me, and I know the best, and butt out. So that was my first rehab experience. I was probably an arrogant jerk. And so, but the second time I went back, I was a little bit more humble. It's like, okay, I was not right. Maybe you guys are right. Tell me what you guys have to say. And that's when they kind of got into the AA Christianity kind of thing. And that did work for a while, but that, that kind of, the religion is still kind of holding people back from greatness. And that's what I experienced. A very mediocre. I was sober for 7 years, but it was a very mediocre 7 years, where I was truly just that program where, my shadow was still, filling me full of fears, and, like the whole idea of hell and this whole, Christian aspect. And that kept me kind of obedient to the Christian life, or trying to fit into that, that mold that they want you to fit in. And there's a very
You're just a
specific
different
mold.
RPC at that point.
Yeah. You've changed. Yeah. You've just changed characters. Yeah. You've changed from the bank teller to the cop or something, like you've changed, like in a video game, you've just changed characters. And so that was fine for a time because you know what? It was better than being in jail. So it was like, being that character was like, well, this is an improvement, like I'm not on park benches. And so this is the way to be. And that was fine up until my mother was pronounced with cancer, and she is terminal. And it was just like, so, that's traumatizing enough, obviously. But, what made things off the walls was that I thought she was going to hell. I mean, so when my mother was pronounced terminal, I was like 6 years sober, and I was very involved in the church, and she never went. I invited her several times. She wasn't interested. Now I get it. But at the time it was like, like I thought she was going to hell. So that whole year, I see her mind dwindle away. I see her body dwindle away. And what made things much, much worse is that she was eternally damned. And so this whole process brought me right back to drugs and alcohol. Right back. I tried to see pastors and priests and, my sponsor, and nothing was helping because no one was telling, like pastors and priests, they wouldn't tell me she wasn't going to hell, but they wasn't telling me she was. It was this weird limbo. It was like they refused to confirm anything. And it was like, so it just was really screwing with me. And, the sponsor was, work the steps. And it was like, well, like it's just, there's more. There's
That's
more
their
to things.
answer.
And it's like, you guys really aren't helping at all. And so I switched all that. And that's when I went to the shaman route. And that's when the shaman introduced me to yoga and meditation, things that are seen in the Christian world as kind of taboo, and which is ridiculous. And so, the spiritual aspect of things, and that's when I got my first bliss attack, which is, it's like a panic attack if you replace panic with love. And like, I've never experienced anything so amazing in my life. And that's where the book came from. And this whole vision of like this new life all came from. And it was completely separate. They call it, what I've been through, a religious experience. But the problem of, people having this religious experience, for me, what was standing in the way of this religious experience was religion. Very paradoxical. So like this religious experience came from when I, started, not believing the things religion had taught me. So, it's this deep spiritual thing. And there's a huge difference between religion and spirituality. It's, religion divides and spirituality unites. Religion is taught, spirituality is found. So there's a huge difference in between the two, yet people use them interchangeably. And they're like completely separate concepts. I'm spiritual, yet I go to, they say I'm spiritual, but I go to church. I'm a hardcore Christian. You're religious. That's very different than being spiritual. So when I found these things and started coming to these truths, that's when things really started changing. So the spiritual aspect, to growth and recovery is everything. It's the wet part of the ocean. It's everything. And I could not grow or recover without that spiritual aspect, because I tried, and it lasted 3 months.
What does it look like when you say, what does it look like if you had to, share, like you mentioned yoga and meditation, but I'd imagine, you've got, I forget how many years since, that kind of step into recovery. What does this look like for you on like a day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month basis? How do you embrace and engage your spirituality into your everyday life?
And yoga and meditation is how I wake up. So I wake up and it's still, people think, these amazing things happen and you have these wake up moments and everything has changed. I still wake up every day with anxiety every day. And so it's what I do with that anxiety. It's how I choose to harness it. And anxiety can be seen as a gift if you look at it in that light. It's like, okay, I have anxiety. Guess what that means? I get to go meditate. I get to go do yoga, and it's going to be dramatically reduced. And it is every time. So that is what I do. And, working out, taking care of myself, the nutrition aspect, taking care of your body is the mind, body, spirit trifecta. Mm-hmm. And when you pay attention and give respect to one, it feeds the other two. And so if you're constantly looking at which one of those three needs attention and giving that the attention, you're never going to feel empty. So it's mind, body, spirit. If you're feeling wonky or weird at one moment, like what of those three things needs my attention? Do I, is this a mind or body, spirit? Do I need to go inside? Do I need to meditate and just sit there? Is this a body thing? Am I just feeling anxious? Do I need to go work out? It's being conscious and aware of that triangle that makes us whole. And so that's really where, and that's kind of where the medical community it becomes not as effective as they could be, because they leave out that critically important aspect of the triangle of the spirit. Yeah. And only recently did they decide that the mind and body are even connected. That's very, very recent. Like
I know,
10,
which
15 years, like 2010 maybe, they kind of found the God particle and realized that, oh, maybe there's something going on here. That's really recent, though.
I've had this conversation with handfuls of folks, so you might appreciate it, and it's coming to mind that if we go back into the mid to late 19th century, right, early 1800s up to like early 1900s, it was medical. Like they did this like really deep advance into medical. They did a lot of research. They started kind of exploring the body perspective, and then you end up in the early 1900s. And it was the Sigmund Freuds and the Carl, they went in down to the mind perspective. And I believe we are in the time right now where spirituality is being researched and finally being, and at some point in the next 100 years, it will be seen as the focal that both, right? So we often do mind body like this and, mind at the top. Well, I believe the focal is the spirituality at the bottom, and the mind and the body in essence are only depend upon that. So it's been very fascinating to see, but I think we are in the age right now that spirituality will start to get the research around it that it's needed. I've got I'm just watching the time, but I've got this question because you've mentioned like the AA, some of the 12 step, you've mentioned the whole like, okay, you can only go to AA if it's alcohol, NA if it's, so on and so forth. I'm just curious, Justin, what's your perspective on this? Like, why do you think that people, do this divide, or why do you think that there's like a blinder to this broader spiritual path in recovery? Because you and I both, different stories, but have similar experiences where the path of AA or the traditional kind of 12-step program, we recognize that something was missing. There was a big component. So why do you think that it feel like there is this challenge, right? Why do people end up in this secondary RPC stepping into recovery, so to speak? I'm just curious your perspective. Why do you think it exists?
That's the way they want it, right? I'm not going to get big into conspiracies and go deep into there, but it's the whole reason religion was created in the first place, is because there's this upper echelon of folks that want to keep everyone else down, and they don't want everyone else to realize who they are, because the people at the top know who they are. And so now they have some brokenness in their soul, so they know who they are, but they want to control. So those of us who know who we are and are working on that brokenness now want to free everyone else. Well, that's not the usual. That's not the usual human kind of need is to want to be on top and to control. And so someone like Bill Wilson, good Lord, the guy had no evil intent in his heart. He's completely blameless, but he took this thing that was created and saw that there was good things in it, but not really recognizing the things that weren't so good. So he created something completely amazing. But if you think about it, the 1920s, he realized, God bless his heart, right? He realized this was a spiritual problem. This is not a medical issue. This is a spiritual problem. So 1920s America, what do you choose if you're going to choose spirituality? Jews are Jews, Muslims are Muslims. The Buddhist thing hadn't made its way over yet. New Age was 30 years away. So what do you choose? Christianity. So that's the foundation on which he created the 12 steps in AA. So that's the foundation it's built on. It's disguised Christianity. So that's really where it gets out, in terms of like, it's the way they started, whoever they are, and they have changed over time. Those at the top have changed dramatically over time, but they're still there. They're just different people, and they've always been there, and they've always been trying to hold everyone else down. But that's really where the whole thing comes from, is why we've go from RPC 1 to RPC 2, is because that's the way they've engineered it. But there's a few of us here, and it's happening over time. And I do believe you're right that the spirit is being held in. But there's going to be someone who's going to stand right in front of that, and that's Big Pharma. They're going to be staunchly against the spirit, because they realize that that's going to take. You can't bottle positive energy. You cannot bottle and sell positive energy. So they are going to fight against. That's the they're going to fight against that. But that's where it's coming.
We'll jump into that
eventually.
We'll jump into that. They are going to get into the play, and you know how they're going to do it is that ibogia or whatever with the psychedelics. They're going to start. That's how they're going to try to get their hands into this spiritual pot, is trying to control the plant medicine that so many folks have used to help access spirit in a way that. So they'll try to make that play, but thank goodness there are folks like you and I that are sharing another way, which gets us to kind of this last question that I've got popping up. Justin, I know that people listen to this podcast that are just stepping into their journey. I know that there are folks that listen that have been in AA and just have felt lost, or NA, or any kind of like 12-step. What would you tell people right now if they are, they that we're talking about have kind of their reins into them? They've got this disillusionment that there's one way in recovery, or that AA or NA or any of these other programs are the path. Like, they have to work the steps if it's going to work for them, so to speak. What would you say to these folks right now?
One size fits all does not include healing. So there is no one size fits all for healing, and there simply is not. There's people that have been, and that's what I've created this whole kind of book and system and everything is it's something separate from AA. There's no religious foundation whatsoever. I built it from a spiritual foundation instead of a religious foundation. So I would say, but the thing that AA has, and I would never tell someone. So the thing that AA has, and Christianity has too, is, and they've really conquered this aspect, and it's a critical aspect to humanity, and that is that aspect of community. And it is a critical aspect to healing. And so I would never say don't, get involved in a church, don't get involved in AA, but take things with a grain of salt, because meet people, and it's hard because people like me have we want to question things. We don't get on board with things super easy. We're not just going to listen. We're goats and we're not sheep, right? Like, goats, greatest of all time. We're goats. We're not sheep. So like it makes things a little bit tricky, but you need that communal aspect. So it's very difficult. It's just going to be create a community of, sorcerers and witches, right? That's what it is like, create this community of like-minded people that think differently, that don't want just inside the box thinking, that think for themselves. I don't want you to listen to what I'm saying. I want you to hear what I'm saying and then tell me what you think. So, that's it. This may work for some people, it may not. But again, healing and personal growth is not one size fits all. So that's the most important thing I'd try to tell people, is just that there are many ways. And unfortunately, right now, the communal aspect, which is very critical to healing, is very limited for people that think like us. Very, very limited. Extremely limited. Like, you're hard pressed to even find. You've got your group, which is fantastic with the witches. They have this kind of Buddhist. It's called Refuge Recovery. For it's like kind of an AA Buddhist offshoot, and there's but you're not gonna find meetings you can go to. They're online meetings only, because there's too few people. So you have to find online meetings with people with more like-minded, and then maybe find meetings or churches around you with people that maybe don't fall in line, but maybe you'll meet some nice people that maybe have similar views but have no place to go either. So that's it's very tough to say, because I want people to have that communal aspect, and it's very important to healing, but at the same time, don't necessarily absorb. Think for yourself. Be a goat. Yeah. Don't be a sheep. Think for yourself, and discernment. Discernment is what a sorcerer uses, what a witches use. Discernment. You hear what other people say, you think about it, you put it in your heart, then your heart will tell you what works for you, but then you have to go that route. So it's difficult to have advice for people, because it's all over the place. And just like when I went there, I have no for sure advice. I have a lot of kind of vague advice.
You talked a little bit, Justin, about you've got a book and you've kind of got a way. I've got your website up here on the screen, but why don't you go ahead and share with folks if they were interested in finding out more about you, talking to you, or connecting with you, to get the book or see what that's about. Where do they find that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is all very, very new. You got the website down there, awakenthesorcerer.com. Just launched it last year. And I've got the book, which is Sorcery 101, 13 Rungs to a Higher Elevation of Consciousness. That's on Amazon and on the website, as well as the Audible. If you don't like reading, it's on Audible. And I can even send you a free book if you want to do sorcerer13@gmail. That is my email. I have no problem sending out a PDF just to get the information out there, because it's just... I wrote it not necessarily. I hope to eventually, be able to at least pay my bills someday with all this, but I want to make a change, and I want to put something out there that people will gravitate around, and hopefully we'll have sorcerer and witch meetings, and as much as AA meetings, and people with more like-minded. But we're just not there yet. The other thing is Instagram. I was off social media for 5 years, and let me tell you, it was wonderful. It was like a horse wearing blinders. During that time period, I was writing the book, and I was just completely off social media, and I ran a better race. It was truly like a horse wearing blinders, and that's what I experienced during that time period. But social media can also be a good thing. There's never black and white. Few things are black and white in this world. So social media can also be used for good things. So I'm back on it. I like interacting with people. Instagram. I still have Facebook PTSD, so I don't think I'm going to go back to that ever. And I realize Instagram is controlled by Facebook, but maybe one day they'll make them sell it, because I can't stand Facebook. But it's sorcerer_13, so with a U, sorcerer_13. That's Instagram. And I'm just, we'll see where things go. It's very, very new, but it's exciting, and I really hope to get out there and show people that healing is not one size fits all.
I love that. I love that so much. Folks that are listening, if you check in the description, we'll have the link to his website, his email address, as well as his Instagram. Definitely check out Justin. I agree. Hopefully one day we will have meetings for witches and sorcerers throughout the United States. I know we are actively moving towards that. So there's a lot of effort on our end to try to make that happen. So Justin, thank you so much for being here with us today. I appreciate it. I know the listeners appreciate it. And hopefully, I don't know, you got any... if you got another book up your sleeve, maybe you'll be back at some other point and you can share that, or something else good that you're working on. So we look forward to having you back someday. So
I do. So I'll be back.
Awesome. Well, much love, folks, from both of us to all of you. We will talk to all of you again very soon.
Thanks.